want to start actually Yud Gimel Amud Aleph on the very, very top. However, the bottom line of Yud Bey is, Bey we never read. It says, Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Talmud Echad Chulu. Okay. In the name of Rabbi Shmuel, one student said that the Machlekes Beisil and Beishamai, let me go back, the Machlekes Beisil and Beishamai regarding how to make a mavoi, an alleyway, permissible to carry in, was Beishamai held that you need a lechi and a kaira, that means a side post and a crossbeam. And Beisil said either one, just one or the other. Now, the student said in front of Rabbi Akiva, said that the Machlekes is only in between 4 amos and 10 amos. But under 4 amos, even if the entranceway is under 4 amos, even Beishamai would agree that you only need one or the other. You don't need both. Rabbi Akiva said no. They argue about even under 4 amos. Now in the Gemara, we took it a step further. We said, according to that, how small do they argue about? If they argue even under 4 amos, how small does it get? At what point do you not need anything? So we had a statement from, was it Rav Achli? And some say Rabbi Yechiel, that it was until 4 Tfachim. Anyway, we start off with, in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, the student said that they don't argue under 4 amos. Rabbi Akiva says that Beishamai and Beisil argue about both. The Gemara asks 1 second. Rabbi Akiva hainu Tanakama. Rabbi Akiva is the Tanakama. Because the assumption here is that the Tanakama did not mention the limits of the Machlekes. They said there's Machlekes, Beishamai, and Beisil. When is the Machlekes? In everything. Whenever there's an opinion over there, which means any entranceway to a mavoi is going to be Machlekes. Do you need both a lechi and a kaira? Do you just need a lechi or a kaira? And that's the Machlekes. So someone introduced that the Machlekes is only in a certain case. And Rabbi Akiva said, no, the Machlekes is about everything. But that was the first opinion. That's the Tanakama. The Gemara says, there's a difference between Rabbi Akiva's opinion and the Tanakama's opinion, even though they said the same thing. And it doesn't have to do with the Machlekes Beishamai and Beisil. It has to do with one step further. If it's that small, the entranceway, it's a very narrow entranceway, it's not even 4 Tfachim. So one of these opinions, either the Tanakama or Rabbi Akiva, holds that you don't need a lechi or a kaira. Because Rav Achli and Rav Yechiel or Rav Yechiel said that that's not even considered a doorway. That doesn't need to be blocked off. That doesn't need to be blocked off. That's so small that it's insignificant. And the other opinion says that no, even under 4 Tvachim, you still need to have a lechi or a kaira. Now the Machlekes between the student and Rabbi Akiva, how it works, that was under 4 amos. That was Machlekes. But those two opinions that hold that even under 4 amos is a Machlekes, they argue about, what about under 4 Tfachim? Do you still need a lechi or a kaira? Or both? Or both, according to that opinion. So it turns out we don't know who holds what because we have nothing proving either way. But that's Machlekes is 2 opinions here. The halacha, at least the Rambam holds that under 4 amos you need a lechi or a kaira. Under 4 Tvachim, I mean. Under 4 Tvachim you still need a lechi or a kaira, not like Rav Achli. The Gemara gives us that option. Now, if you remember before, on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, towards the bottom, it says, Iba Yesema, the Rav Achli Gufei Tanaihi. That Rav Achli is a Machlekes Tanaim, do we hold of Rav Achli? And that Gemara was referring to this Gemara over here. He said that on Daf Yud Gimel, that's going to be, someone commented, it seems like everything is on Daf Yud Gimel. Everything is a page later. So, but that would be this Machlekes. Okay. I think in Shulchan Aruch, both opinions are brought. If under 4 Tvachim, you need to put a lechi or a kaira. Now, it's really this whole machlek is really only one tefach, because once it reaches 3 tefachim, then you don't need anything. 3 tefachim is lava. This whole deal is just that one tefach. So we have a very interesting Gemara here. Everything is interesting. This is unique. You'll see. Tanya, starting a brisa. Amr Rabbi Akiva, le'amr Rabbi Shmuel davar zeh. Rabbi Akiva challenges the student. Rabbi Akiva said, no, they argued about both. But not only that, he adds on one point. He says, Rabbi Shmuel never said this. It was the student that said it. Rabbi Shmuel, it's impossible Rabbi Shmuel said such a thing. Rashi explains, I know that Rabbi Shmuel is such a chacham, he never would have said this. And then Rabbi Akiva concludes, V'halacha kaisa Talmud, and the halacha is like that Talmud. Well, it's a bit of a problem. First you say that it's not logical at all, and then you say the halacha is like the Gemara asks, Sagufa kasha. That's a self-contradictory. First you start off saying Rabbi Shmuel never said this because it's impossible. Rabbi Shmuel was a chacham, a wise man. He never would have said that. Obviously, the halacha is not that. You can't follow that. That's not logical. Then you say that that's the halacha. Amr Rabbi Yehuda, Amr Shmuel, Amr Rabbi Akiva l'chaded bas talmidim. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel that Rabbi Akiva, when he said halacha kaisa Talmud, he just wanted the students to think of what rationale there could be. But he didn't really mean the halachas like that. He wanted the students to work on it, to sharpen the students. Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar nir nitmar. Nachman Yitzchak said that he didn't say the halachas like that. He said it appears that the halachas like that. Now, what that means is that I know from tradition that Rabbi Shmuel couldn't have said that because that's not the halacha, but it's really just the opposite. It's logical what the student said. It's nirin. It appears to be correct, but I know it's not because I know Rabbi Shmuel didn't say that because that's not the tradition. Now, how does he know Rabbi Shmuel's tradition? That I don't know. Let's take a look. There's one more little piece to add to the drama here. Amr Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, "Kol makom shatamaitzi mishum Rabbi Shmuel Amr Talmud Echad l'fnei Rabbi Akiva." Who is it? Whenever we find in Shas that in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, a student said in front of Rabbi Akiva, who is that? Einei ela Reb Meir. It's Reb Meir. We get the name. Why did it leave it out the whole time? We had a similar thing by Rabbi Yeshua and Gamliel. They were arguing about Tfilas Ma'arvis Rishus or Chayva, and there was a Gemara Brachas. And Gemara says that a certain student informed Rabbi Gamliel Rabbi Yeshua's opinion, and then Rabbi Yeshua gets embarrassed. He asked him in public. Then at the end of the Gemara it says, "Vayisei Talmud, Reb Shimon bar Yochai." It waits the whole Gemara to tell us who it was. So here also it like sort of waits and then it throws in. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that it's Reb Meir. Sheshimish es Rabbi Yishmael ves Rabbi Akiva, because he served both. That means he was a student of both. He served Rabbi Yishmael, he was a student of Rabbi Yishmael, he was a student of Rabbi Akiva. The Tanya was taught in a braysta. Amar Reb Meir. Reb Meir says, Kashitzitz Esel Rabbi Yishmael. When I was by Rabbi Yishmael, Yisimato kankantim latecha diyai. I would put kankantim, which is vitriol. It's copper sulfate. It was called, I think it was called blue vitriol in those times. And he would put it into his ink. Well, Yomali David didn't say anything about it. Apparently, it makes the ink more permanent. And we'll see, possibly it does other things as well, but it makes the ink more permanent. Kishabasi Eitzel Rabbi Akiva, however, when I came, Rabbi Shmuel never told me anything. When I come to Rabbi Akiva, who was his next teacher, Australite. He said, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to add kankantim, this copper sulfate into it. The Gemara says, Eini, is that so? But Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Shmuel in the name of Reb Meir. I don't know if Shmuel could have seen Reb Meir, but he says in the name of Mishum, in the name of Rabbi Akiva. When I was learning by Rabbi Akiva, I would put this copper sulfate into the ink. And he didn't tell me anything. It's exactly the opposite. We had this story just a minute ago. When I was by Rabbi Shmuel, I would put kankantim and he never told me anything. When I came to Rabbi Akiva, he said, no, you can't do it. Now we have the story. When I'm by Rabbi Akiva, I would put kankantim into the ink. He never told me anything. When I come to Rabbi Shmuel, he asks me, my son, what is your work? What's your profession? I said, I'm a scribe. He says, you have to be careful. When your work, your work is the work of heaven. Yeah? Your work is the work of heaven. You could miss a letter or add a letter. You're destroying the world. What does it mean, missing a letter or adding a letter? Rashi says, let's say it says, Vashem Malikim Emes. If you leave out the aleph, then it says mace. It's a big problem. Mace means death. So that's destroying the world. In other words, Rashi's making it that it turns verses into heresy. That's the issue here. Not necessarily do you have to learn it like that, but this is how Rashi learns it. You could learn any letter as other Mefarshim learn it. Let's say, what is it? Adding a letter. Let's say it says Vayidaber Hashem, and you add a vav. It says Vayidabru. They, it makes it a plural. It's they. That's also heresy. So that's destroying the world. So Amarti Loi Davar Echad. I told him, Davar Echad Yeshli. I have this. This is Reb Meir speaking. He asked me, "What do you do?" I said, Reb Meir says, "I'm a scribe." He says, "Oh, you have to be very careful. You could destroy the world if you miss or add a letter." So I said to him, "Davar Echad Yeshli v'kankantam shmesh, and I matal l'teichad yai. I have this thing that I add into the ink. That's supposed to help." The Gemara is going to ask, "How does that help? If adding a letter or missing a letter? It's not the ink that does that. That's the scribe that does it." So Amar Li says to me, "Are you allowed to add that in? You're allowed to add copper sulfate, kankantim. Because of a machak sav shechalimches, you have to have ink that's erasable." You have to have ink that's erasable. And the kankantim makes it permanent. In Klalacha, we don't add kankantim, but if there is kankantim, it's kosher. I think lechatchila is supposed to be, I don't know. Lechatchila is supposed to be erasable ink. Erasable, I think with water, erasable. Not to scrape it off. That would always be, you could always scrape it off, I think. But that it's erasable, that it would dissolve if you would add water on it. Okay, the Gemara asks right away, what's going on over here? There was this conversation. He said one thing, he's told him back, something that seems not relevant. My karmale, my kamahadale. Rabbi Shmuel said, you have to be very careful with you don't miss a letter. He said, no, I have kankantim. What was his response? Hachi karmale. Loimi boy v'chaseres v'yaseres like te'ina, the bakiana. Besides for the fact of the letters that don't be concerned about, I'm an expert. I don't make a mistake in that. I know all the letters. Ela afilu mechash lezuv nami. Even if you're concerned that maybe a fly is going to rest on the edge of a letter. Let's say the edge of, see that the edge of the Dalet of Echad. Where I saw that, I think it was in Rashi. Oh, the Gemara says, maybe he's going to sit on the edge of a Dalet, and it's going to turn it into a reish because we'll take off that the corner. See, a dalet is really what sticks out in the back. It protrudes in the back. That's what's different than a reish. But in actuality, in halacha, it's really the corner of the dalet. Even if it was straight and it didn't protrude, it would still be a dalet if it came to a corner. So it's really that corner that's the big deal. If that corner is missing, we make it protrude. But what really makes it into the dalet is that corner. So if that it says Hashem Echad, if a fly would come and sit on that corner and then would fly away, it would take that little drop of ink with it. So it would leave it as a reish. It says you don't have to be worried about that because I use kankantim. Some learn that kankantim was an insect repellent and the flies wouldn't land on it. Others say no, it would leave a residue. So it wouldn't. Once you put it on, it wouldn't be able to remove the whole thing.
Well, I'm not a chemist, and I surely don't know how it's done. But I do know that what's unique about the ink that is used on cloth is that it does not penetrate the material. So when you write on paper with something, so you can't be meichek because you're just going to destroy the paper. So something within the chemistry of the ink allows the ink to bond with the cloth, but not penetrate. And that's how actually you could be mekalef without destroying the cloth at the same time. So it could be that the kankantam actually hardens it.
Is it?
And as a result, that's when if there's a problem, I can still go and wear it or whatever it is. But maybe my father knows more because he's a little bit more of a chemist in that sense. But just throwing out two possible sense there. Why? Because they keep on saying I'm adding kankantam to do something good, and theoretically it's not. That's what I could think of.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
You said earlier that the ink was originally water soluble.
Right.
Water soluble is ionic bonds. Copper sulfate is ionic bonds. Certainly they can bond. The cloth is organic. Water and organic doesn't really ever mix. It just can be together, and that would go with what Moshe just said.
Interesting.
You know.
Interesting.
That's just a thought.
I was understanding that the kankantim it didn't have to do with the cloth versus paper or something like that. I didn't understand that. I understood that it was. I mean, it has to be like that anyway because it has to. We're discussing with the residue on the cloth. But Okay, fine. So, some people think that it needs to be written in permanent ink. Now, it is permanent, but it's still erasable.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so now the Gemara says, Kasha shimash hashimash kasha asra asra. We have two stories here that don't fit together at all. One of them is that Rabbi Meir first learned by Rabbi Shmuel. Another one is that Rabbi Meir first learned by Rabbi Akiva. That we have a historical question. We also have a halachic contradiction. That one is that Rabbi Akiva didn't say anything. Rabbi Shmuel told him it's no good. The other one is Rabbi Shmuel didn't say anything, and Rabbi Akiva told him it's no good. So there's two contradictions. The Gemara says, we can resolve the historical issue easily. First, he came to Rabbi Akiva. We have a student by Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Meir comes to Rabbi Akiva. Wasn't able to understand Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was very deep. Challenge everything, every letter, everything had to have an explanation. He wasn't able to follow. Rabbi Meir wasn't able to follow Rabbi Akiva. So Asla Kami to Rabbi Shmuel, Begomer Gemara. He went to Rabbi Shmuel and he just learned Mishnayos. First, you have to learn material. You have to have some information. He learned the Mishnayos. About Asla Kami to Rabbi Kiva, Savar Svara, and then he came to Rabbi Kiva and he got the depth, the logic, the comparisons, and all of that. Ella Asr Kasha, but what about who's paskin that it was Asr to use kankantim? Was it Rabbi Akiva? Was it Rabbi Shmuel? That's a problem. Gemara says Kasha. We don't have an answer for. It's a very interesting thing that we have midrashim, even Gemaras, that Rabbi Meir Sefer Torah had letters that were written differently. For example, the clothing of Adam Rishon says kasneis ar, which is clothing of leather, which could mean wool. Wool, Gemara says, what comes from the skin. But Rabbi Meir Sefer Torah says kasneis ar, with the aleph, clothing made of light. So the Gemara tells us, the Medrash tells us that kasneis ar, that his Sefer Torah was written there. And then we have other comments that Rabbi Meir Sefer Torah was different, which is interesting how that fits with this Gemara, that where Rabbi Meir says, no, there's no problem. I have all of it perfect. Meanwhile, his Sefer Torah is different. So, yeah, it could be that it doesn't mean that Rabbi Meir's Sefer Torah was actually different. It could mean that it was written in the margin, those things, that was Rabbi Meir's translation of it. Like it was a drush that Rabbi Meir had written in. It could be a teretz to this question. Okay, Tanya. It says in Svarim that Rabbi Meir, the kasneis ar, Meir means light, the clothing of light. Rabbi Meir had access to the araganas, to the hidden light that was hidden away in the Torah. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Aimer. Rabbi Yehuda says Rabbi Meir Hayamer. In the name of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir used to say. Rabbi Yehuda said that Rabbi Meir used to say. Rabbi Yehuda is Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Lai. It's his friend. He says that his friend would say, "L'kol matilim kankantim l'teicha di'ay chutz mi parshas saita." You can put kankantim, it's copper sulfate, into anything except for the portion of the saita. The saita is the woman that her behavior is questionable and she has to drink this water, so they have to erase the ink off this parchment. They put it into water. Now, if you put kankantim into it, then it's not going to erase. So Rabbi Meir says you can use kankantim for everything except for parshas saita. Parshas saita is parshas saita, that's written in the Sefer Torah. Rabbi Yaakov says in his name, I think it's in the name of Rabbi Meir, that chutz mi parshas saita sheba mikdash, not in the Sefer Torah. Rabbi Meir said that they had a separate scroll that they would write, the section of the saita on. That, if you would put that was the one that was really dipped into the water and erased in the water. But in the Sefer Torah, there's no problem. You can just write with kankantim. I'm sorry, I skipped a question. My benai, what's the difference between these two opinions? The difference is if you can erase it from the Torah itself. Can you dip the section from the Torah, let's say, can you take that portion of that's written in the Torah, put it into water, and erase it into the water, and then use that water for the saita to drink. And this will match up with this other Tanaim. These two Tanaim, Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Meir, will match up with the other one. Yeah.
Well, no, I just texted everyone something interesting I found on the internet. If you want to look on your phone, it said that copper sulfate added to ink gives it the potential to be invisible. If you then add ammonia, it'll erase the ink. I know, I'm just saying somehow.
Okay, so what happens then? It erases the ink.
In other words, it'll make the ink, in other words, when you add copper sulfate to ink, it makes the ink the potential to be invisible. You still have the ink, all right? So you write with ink. If you then put it in ammonia or add ammonia, the ink will disappear. So we're talking about putting it in water and it disappears. But I'm saying that on the internet mentions that ammonia will kind of undo the copper sulfate's binding property to ink. I sent it to everybody, whatever it's worth.
It must be that they didn't have ammonia in the water in the Beis Hamikdash.
Well, maybe they had ammonia in the water, yeah.
No, because he said you shouldn't add it.
No, when they
Sounds
did
like
the
it wouldn't work.
Maybe when they did the Sulta thing.
Okay. So the question is, we have a machlekes here if you're allowed to use the scroll, if you're allowed to use the section of the Sefer Torah itself to erase that in water to give it to the Saita to drink. So that's another machlekes. It follows the Tanya ein megillas ksher lahashkes basaita acheres. You can't take the portion written with the intention for one Saita to use. You see, what happened is like this. This woman was secluded with a man. We don't know what happened, but she was secluded, and she was warned, don't be secluded with this man. So she says, I'm innocent. It was nothing happened. So when they take her to the Beis Hamikdash, when she gets to the Beis Hamikdash, they're offering her this water to drink. So it's going to test to see if she's guilty. Now, she says at that point, after the scroll was written and they're about to erase it, they're going to put it in the water. She says, no, I admit, I'm guilty. It's meyani. I'm guilty. So she doesn't have to drink, but she gets divorced and she doesn't get her ksuba. She doesn't get the ksuba, it's the money. So that scroll, that little parchment is still there written. Walks in the next saita for the next thing. Say, oh yeah, why bother? We have one right here. We didn't use it. So the first Tana says you can't use it for the next saita that comes in. You can't use it. No, you could use it. It's not a problem. You take that scroll, that little parchment, probably looks like a mezuzah, and you can use it for the next saita. What's going on over here? We had a machlekes if you can use the scroll, the writing from a Torah itself. According to the first Tana, you can't use it from the Torah itself because you can't use it from another saita. Why? Because it wasn't written for this woman. So when you write it in the Torah, you don't have any women in mind that you're writing it for. You wrote the Torah for kosher Torah. So obviously, if it wasn't written for the intention to be used for this saita, it's not good. The other opinion said, no, I can use from one saita to another saita. I can take that parchment that wasn't used. So it doesn't need to be written l'shma. I can take it off of Sefer Torah as well. That's what the Gemara is suggesting, is that the same machlekes that we have between Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yaakov, in the name of Rabbi Meir, is the same machlekes that we have between the Tanakam and Ravachi Bar Reishya. Amar Rav Papa Dilma Layi, Rav Papa says, how do you know? Maybe it's not so. Ad kan lekamar Tanakam Hasam. Over there, the Tanakam said that it needs to be written l'shma. It has to be written for this woman specifically. Once it's written for one woman, you can't use it for another woman. Maybe both of them would agree. Even the Tanakama that says you can't use it from one woman to another woman would agree that a scroll, the section that was written in the Torah is usable because that's generic. That could be used for any woman. Over here it was written for Rachel, and you're trying to use it for Leah. That's not going to work. It's written for Rachel, not for Leah. Now you want to use it for Leah, it doesn't work. It's more than wasn't written l'shma. It was written for someone else, but by the Torah it was written generic. It wasn't written specifically for anyone, so you could use it for anyone. And this Rav Papa's suggestion that maybe the machlekes doesn't match up exactly. It's different if it's written in the Torah than if it's written for one woman. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Dil Malai, Rav Nachman Yitzchak says maybe it's exactly the opposite. Maybe when does Ravachi bar Reishya say that it's usable, even though it's written for Rachel, and now you want to use it for Leah? Well, it was written for a saita. Doesn't matter which one. Shum saita bailam, a saita, any saita. Aval gabi Torah del Islamic ksiva, chinami delay machkina, chinami delay machkina. But the Torah was written to study, to read from. So that is not usable. Maybe even Rav Achi bar Aishia that says it doesn't need to be written specifically for Leah, could be written for Rachel and use it for Leah, but that will hold that you can't use it if it's written in the Torah scroll. We really don't have a good match, according to these opinions. We don't have a good match for to match up this machlekes. If you can use the Torah scroll to match that, if you can use another woman's portion, section of the Torah, section of the Saita portion. Taisva says an interesting question here. Quotes a Gemara that says that if a man takes a Sefer Torah, gives it to his wife and says that the get, this should be your get, because in it says the laws of Gittin and that it doesn't work. That's what the Gemara says. Can't you give a whole Sefer Torah? This goes through a whole discussion here. In the end, he says on the bottom line, is that would the husband have been happy with this being written for his sake? So by a saita, if the scribe comes along with the Sefer Torah and says, I wrote this Torah, and while I was writing the saita portion, I had your wife in mind. So the guy not necessarily would be infuriated. However, if you would tell him, because I guess he's taking his wife. However, if by the get, if you would say, I wrote the Sefer Torah and I had your wife in mind, I had you in mind, I wrote the Sefer Torah with you in mind as the get, the Shema, then he would be very upset about that. What, you're writing Sefer Torah and that this is going to be used as my get? Yeah, I'm not sure exactly the details over there, but okay. Now we have Leslie Rabbi Barisha Aditanan. The Gemara has a different question. We just discussed one thing using a Sefer Torah, but the Gemara has a question like this. Rabbi Barisha doesn't hold this what it says in the following Mishnah, Kasav get legarish. Let's say a guy writes a get for his wife. Now in the get it has the names. So-and-so, the son of so-and-so. In Nimlach, he decides not to use the get. They made up, they went to counseling and everything is good. Matzah ben Irai, however, someone in the city found that document. Turns out, Bamar Shimcha Kishmei, exact same names. And his wife has the same names as well. Why should he waste money getting a scribe to write a new get? He can use that get from this other guy that is now happy with his wife. It says pasal legash, but you can't use it. According to Rav Achi bar Aishia, you're allowed to use a saita parchment from one woman from Rachel to Leah. But I have a Mishnah that says I can't use a get from Rachel to Leah and whatever, Reuven to Reuven, whatever it is. I can't use it. The Gemara says 1 second. Hold on. Hasam v'kasav laksiv, binon ksiv l'shma. Over there it says v'kasav la. Should write it for her. It means to be written for her specific intent, with that intention that who it's supposed to be used for. And it says v'kasav la. It has to be written with that intention. Hacha v'asa laksiv, binon asiya l'shma. Asiya dida mechikei. Over here it doesn't say, by the site it doesn't say you should write it for her. It says you should do it for her. You should make it for her. What do you make for her? You erase the parchment for her. Well, that's exactly what we're doing. We are erasing it for her. We're not using the old order. We're using a parchment that was written for someone else, and we're erasing it for her. So that's why by the get, it needs to be written Lishma. Rav Achi bar Oshia holds that it doesn't need to be written Lishma, it just needs to be erased Lishma, and that's good enough. That's a shita. Okay. Amar Rav Acha bar Chanina. Rav Acha bar Chanina says, "Galav yidul lifnei mishama v'haya olam." It's known by the Creator. So Hashem knows. The one that spoke and the world came into existence. Shein b'dayir shel Reb Meir k'maisa, that there's no one in the generation of Reb Meir that was like Reb Meir. So why wasn't the halacha like Reb Meir? Why didn't they establish he was the greatest? So his friends couldn't understand what he was saying, which means Reb Meir was so convincing that they didn't know when he was correct, when he wasn't correct. It's the art of a good speaker. They can use all these things to convince you. You don't know, you're so like samished, you don't know something is correct, yeah, you don't know, but does it apply to everything? The mayor was so convincing that they didn't know what was correct. They couldn't, that's how Rashi puts it. He would explain it so well, so they couldn't pass him like him. He could say that something that was pure was impure, and he could explain it. And he could say something that was impure was pure, and he could explain it. He could explain any side. See a little more about this. The way it works, we're going to have soon. We're going to have the Eiruvin Daf on this page of the Gemara. That every argument in the Gemara, each side of the argument is correct. So the question is what the halacha is. But in logic, they're all correct. That's a valid logic. And in Chassidus, you have, there's different ways of looking at things. You have Chesed, you have Gevura. They're both correct. It's just which way you want to look at it. It's like two people are standing on two sides of a table. They ask him, where's the table? He says, oh, it's to the east. They ask the other guy, where's the table? He says, to the west. They're both right. It's just depends where you're looking from. So when there's arguments in the Gemara, they're both right. The question is from what perspective? Reb Meir was able to have all those perspectives and explain them. That's why it says in Svarim that in the Halach l'Meshim Sinai, the Rambam writes, there's no machlekes. There's no arguments in Halach l'Meshim Sinai. There's a lot of kashas on that because we find that there are machlekes in, but the Rambam writes that in Halach l'Meshim Sinai, anything that's from that tradition, there's no machlekes. Now, normally in a regular generation, you have one rabbi that represents Chesed, like a Beis Hillel, and you have a Beis Shammai represents Gevura. So there's a machlekes. But every once in a while, you have a generation where the person is so great that he contains everything. And over there's no machlekes. So Moshe Rabbeinu contained everything. And so Halach l'Moshe Sinai, there was no machlekes. He had everything together. So you need both sides because you only get to the emes when you see both. You can see both positions.
But it sounds good that it's a defect with Rabbi Meir, right? That he was able to explain what was not the halacha as if it was the halacha.
Right.
So that's also a problem, right? Like he should. If it's
it
not,
doesn't seem like a problem with Rabbi Meir. It seems like it's a problem with everyone else. They weren't able to differentiate, to discern which one was correct, which wasn't. It wasn't a problem with Reb Meir. Reb Meir probably knew which one was correct, but there was probably everyone else couldn't follow. That's what it seems. Tana, le Reb Meir Shmai. It's taught in the Brisa that his name wasn't Reb Meir. El Reb Neirai Shmai. His name was Reb Neirai. Both of them mean light. Nahira means light, and Reb Meir means light. Why was he called Reb Meir? Because he would lighten up the eyes of the sages in halacha. very interesting. I don't follow that exactly because it seemed like he would confuse them. I don't know. Now, V'lei Neirai Shmai, his name wasn't Reb Neirai, Ela Reb Nechemya Shmai. His name was really Reb Nechemya. Okay, now on this last piece, we have Amrila Reb Elazar ben Arach Shmai. Some say his name was Reb Elazar ben Arach. Why was he called Neirai? Because he would, Nahira also means he would lighten up the eyes of the sages in halacha. I don't think we have so much from Reb Elazar ben Arach, actually. Yeah. You seen Rabbeinu Chananah? Reb Miyashia Hayashmai. V'lamenik Shmai Reb Meir Shei Meir Panam Ba'alacha. Wow. That's interesting. It's like a different girsa. Okay. Amar Rebbe. Rebbe says, in this last Gemara, there's a whole bunch of discussions. If Reb Nahirai is really Reb Meir, then there's some contradictions. We mentioned that before. Reb Nahirai says something, Reb Meir says something, they seem to contradict. The famous one is if he's going to teach his son a trade or if he's going to teach him only Torah. That's a contradiction, Reb Meir and Reb Nahirai. Amar Rebbe, hi the mechaded na mechavroi. Rebbe Yudah Nasi says, this said I'm sharper than my friends. The reason is the chazisi Reb Meir me'achere is because I saw Reb Meir from his back. That means in the class, Rashi says, when I was learning by Reb Meir, I sat behind him. I guess they would surround the teacher. They rose behind the teacher as well. He sat behind him. He says, V'ilu chazisi mikamei. If I would have seen him from the front, I would have been even more sharp. It says that your eyes should see your teacher. That helps in the learning. So this was the Rebbe attributes his greatness to the fact that he saw Reb Meir. Amar Abavo, Amar Reb Yechanan. Talmud Hayil Reb Meir. Reb Avo says the name of Reb Yechanan that Reb Meir had a student. V'Sumchas Shmai, his name was Sumchas. Sumchas is famous in the Mishnayos and the Gemara because he holds Mammon Amutul B'Safek Cholkin. At any time there's a doubt in a case where the money goes to, you always divide it. Sumchas' opinion. He's a student of Reb Meir. Sheyayimer al kol davar v'davar shel tuma arba mishmei tami tuma. He could explain everything that was tami 48 ways. Al kol davar davar shel tar arba mishmei tami tar, and he could give 48 reasons why it's tar. Anything that's tar, he could explain it in 48 reasons. Tana was taught Talmud Vasakaya b'Yavna. There was an excellent student in Yavna, that he was able to explain why a sheretz, which is this creeping creature, should be tar. He would give 150 reasons for it. So, Tosfos asks over here, what's the big praise over here? I mean, it's clearly tummy. The Torah says it's tummy. And then you're showing that you, obviously in proper logic, that if you're saying that it's, Tosfos gives another pshat that it's not referring really to a sheretz, it's referring to something that could be tar. Amar Ravina, ani adam vatareno, I can tell you how. Watch. It says, goes like this. What about the snake? The snake kills. Now, when it kills, it increases impurity into the world because there's now a dead person in the world. So, either a person or animal. So it increases impurity, but nevertheless tar. But the snake itself is pure. So sheretz, like Walshkin, a sheretz that doesn't kill. It's just a lizard or whatever. So it doesn't kill. So is it not all the more so that it should be tar? If a nachash, which is so bad, is tar, a sheret, which is not so bad for should be tar. The Gemara says it's not a good logic because Maisukait Ba'alma Ka'avid. The snake that kills doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just a thorn. A thorn isn't bad. It's just you poke it in the wrong place. So the snake, it's just a thorn. Some of those thorns have poison, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just how it's used. Okay. Amar Abba Shmuel. Baba says in the name of Shmuel, Shalish Shanim Nechleku Beishamai Beisilal for 3 years. Beishamai and Beisilal argued, Halalu Aimah Malacha Kameseinu. These said Allah is like us. Halalu Aimah Malacha Kameseinu. These said Allah is like us. Yatzabaskal Vamra Eilu Develikim Chayim. Malacha Kabesilal. Voice comes out from heaven and says, both of them are correct. Both of them are the words of the living God. However, the Allah is like Beisilal. Gemara asks, 1 second, how do you say both of those in the same sentence? If both of them are correct, both of them are the word of the living God, so why is the halacha like Beisilal? My answer is because they were neichen, they were like easy to get along with. They were and aluvim is that they were humble. They could bear if they were insulted. And they would teach their own logic. They would also teach the logic of the other side of Beishamai. They weren't just ignoring the opinion of Beishamai. They took it serious, and they would have to they would answer it. Not only would they explain the other opinion, but they would actually say the other opinion first. As it was taught, if someone has his head and most of his body in a sukkah, but his table, he has maybe like a back porch or something, and his table he doesn't take outside. His table he leaves in the house, and he puts his chair outside. So his food is in the house, but his body and his head is outside underneath the sukkah. So Beishamai Pais and Beisil Machshir. Beishamai says it's puzzle. Beisil says that it's kosher. It's not a problem. Amr Beisil Beishamai. Beisil says to Beishamai, I skip. No. Amr Beisil Beishamai Lekachai Maisa. Was there not a story? Sholcha Zikne Beishamai Zikne Beisil Levakas Rabbi Yechon ben Acharanes. That the elders of Beishamai and Beisil went to visit Rabbi Yechon ben Acharanes. Matzu Yeshiv Reshavu B'Sukkah V'Shulchan B'Techa Bayis. We have a story. Rabbi Yechon ben Acharanes would do this. And the elders would visit him. It was perfectly fine. He was sitting in his sukkah, and the table was in the house. So what's the problem? So, Amalehen Beishamai responds, Misham Raya, Afin Amalem, Kena Yisanai, like Kamta Mitzvah Sukkah Miyamecha. The sages told him that if that's how you fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, you never fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah in your life. You're not yaitza. Very interesting thing over here because he was sitting in the sukkah. Beishamai has a gzeira that you may follow your table into the house, and there's a rabbinic problem with sitting in a sukkah like that. Beishamai says, if this is how you fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, then you never fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah in your life. Now, really? Of course he fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah. He just violated a rabbinic decree. Unless you learn that the rabbis have the power to take off the mitzvah, that the power of the rabbis is so strong that even the biblical mitzvah you don't fulfill. Tosis discusses this in Masechta Sukkah. Lamdecha, what we learned from this, what happened here is that Beis Hillel is saying as a proof to Beishamai why they're correct. And when they said the story, they said that Shahalchu Ziknei Beishamai v'Ziknei Beis Hillel. The elders of Shammai and the elders of Beis Hillel went. That's the proof. But who did they say first? Shammai. So they always put the other side first. They gave them that respect. They put them first. Okay. This teaches us, anyone that humbles himself, God raises him up. But anyone that raises himself up, Hashem puts him down, lowers him down. Anyone that chases after greatness, the greatness runs away from him. You run away from greatness, and the greatness follows him. This doesn't work in politics. Maybe it does, I don't know. Anyone that pushes the time, that means that he tries very hard to get wealthy and it's not working, but he still goes and he travels to places, puts himself into these positions, it will keep pushing away from him. But if someone waits for the time, then he waits for the right time for it to come, then it will come. Taner Rabbanan was taught in the Brisa, for 2.5 years, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued. One of them said that it's better a person shouldn't have been created. Better not to have been created. No, it's better for a person to be created. They're arguing. The Marsha explains that they're arguing over what the odds are. Because there's more negative prohibitions than positive commandments. So the odds are that the person's going to mess up. There's 365 prohibitions to 248 positive commandments. The odds are against him. And that's what they're discussing. And however, Nimra V'Gamru, Nayach Le'Ladam Shlei Nivra Yesem Mishin Nivra. They concluded at the end that really it was better for a person not to be created. But now that he was created, he should examine, scrutinize his actions and do tshuva. Some say that he should scrutinize his future actions. That's how it's explained over here.
Suitable fellow.
Yeah. Someone asked, what's the whole simcha by a bar mitzvah? Now that he's chayiv, the odds are against him, if this is correct. I forget where I saw this in one of the Svarim. Okay, the Mishnah says, HaKaira she'amru, the beam, the cross beam that we said that makes a mavoi valid, rechava kadei lekabel ariach, needs to be wide enough to hold a brick. A riach is a type of brick. We'll see in a moment. But a riach chatzi leveina. A riach is really half a brick. Shal shleisha tvachim of 3 tvachim. This type of brick is a 3 by 3 brick. 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim. It's a square brick. So half a brick is 1.5 by 3. So we're talking about that. The kaira can hold 1.5. Okay. It's enough for the kaira, for the crossbeam, to be 1 tefach to be able to hold this brick. Gemara's going to ask, what about the half? This is only it's a little lighter. That's good, right? Okay. Rechava, it needs to be wide, kadei lekabel ariach. Bria kadei lekabel ariach. It also needs to be strong to hold the brick. Rabbi Yehuda says it needs to be wide, but it doesn't need to be strong. Let's say it was made out of straw, this explanation of Rabbi Yehuda. It's not strong enough to hold the brick. No, it's wide enough. It's made out of reeds, but you just imagine that it's made out of metal, titanium, whatever metal they had then. higher or something. Akuma, let's say it's crooked. I'm just going to explain that akuma means that it's actually bending out of the mavoi, but we can assume that it's straight. Agula, if it's round. So then, you imagine that it's square. Now, agula could mean, there's different explanations. Either it's like roundish because it's like an arch, or it's round because it's a pole. Anything that has a circumference of 3 tvachim, then it has a diameter of 1 tefach. The average of pi be 1 to 3. See in the Gemara how they learned it from. They learned it from verses. Okay. Gemara says tefach. Said in the Mishnah that it needs to be a tefach. Tefach hamachzaboy on top of Yudalit. It needs to be a tefach and a half. The Gemara says no. Keeping the rachav tefach. Keeping the rachav the kabel tefach. Once it's 1 tefach. Ida chati tefach malben lebetina mashu mehagis mashu mehagis bekaima. You can put plaster up against the rest of the other half. In other words, there's a quarter on one side of the tefach and a quarter on the other side, because you put the brick in the middle, and the brick is a tefach and a half. Let's get a screen up. Okay. Let's lift this off. Here they're showing you the square inside the circle. Those are explanations for Akuma. We'll see. But here, this picture is interesting. What they're doing here on the base, on this bottom, is like a 2x4. And then the aleph is the brick that's on top. They're showing you is that you can put plaster underneath to plaster it in. You're putting the plaster underneath, and that's how it holds it. I guess it doesn't fall off or something. But okay, basically, the pole, the crossbeam, does not need to be the tefach and a half. Okay. Amar Rabba Baravuna. Rabba Baravuna says, "Karish amra tzrichus tebriel kedel kabel oriach, u'ma'amidei kara ena tzrichim shi'abriel kedel kabel kara variach." The beam itself needs to be able to support a brick. What about the supports of the beam? Do they need to be able to support the beam and the brick, or just to support the beam? So Rabba Baravuna says, only the beam needs to be able to support the brick. The supports of the beam do not need to be able to support it. Both of them need to be able to support the brick as well. Let's just show you this picture. Let me leave this up if there's more things we need here. That's the Ma'amidei Kaira. There's like a little book. It looks like the things that come out to hold the shelves of the bookcase. So that's the, like a pin. It's coming out. Does not need to be able to support the brick as well. Okay. So now it says, that's a machlekes. That's a machlekes between Rabba Bar Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes is a little later. Let's say you put a kaira crossbeam. And you hang a mat over it. And it's raised off the ground 3 tvachim. Here's the picture of a beam going across, and there's a mat hanging over, and there's that little kid, little goat, that's there. So it says, Kaira Inkan, you don't have a crossbeam. Rashi says because you can't see it. Is that what it said? Because you can't see it? Someone says because you can't see it. And others say that I think the Rashba says because it's actually not strong enough to carry it, to hold the brick. Kaira Inkan, Mechitza Inkan. You don't have a beam and you don't have a Mechitza. Kaira Inkan, da Mechasya, because it's covered. The Gemara says because it's covered. How does the Rashba learn this? I don't know. Mechitza Inkan, da Havala Mechitza Shagadiam Baikimba. You don't have a mechitza either, even though it's going all the way down. Or it's low, it's good. It's like a wall. Problem is that it's a wall, but it doesn't reach the ground. And a wall that doesn't reach the ground, that the animals can crawl under it, it's not considered a wall. It's machlokes, but that's what he's saying. If you have a beam that goes across, it doesn't give us the picture for this. Maybe it does. Yeah, we have to look at 97. Basically, it's a beam that goes across but doesn't reach the end. Okay, we'll leave that. The next one is more significant. Oh, you have two beams. Like this right here, picture 177. You have a beam coming out this way, you have a beam coming out that way. That looks like it's going to fall in the middle. But let's say it's banged, it's nailed down. So, but they don't reach each other. So, if it's less than 3 tvachim within those two beams, then you don't have to bring another beam to put on top. But if it's more than 3 tvachim, then you have to put an extra beam to connect them. It needs to go all the way across. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, we had before, he holds that love it is 4 tvachim. He holds that the in between those two beams could be up to 4 tvachim. Okay, b'chein beis keres hamatim lezu kedei lekabel ariach. I'm sorry, matimis lo bezu kedei lekabel ariach, lo bezu kedei lekabel ariach. Let's take a look here. Here you have two beams that are going across the mavai. Both of them are pretty weak. Each one alone does not have the ability to hold the brick. So when you put them together though, im makbilas ariach l'rachbai tefach ein tzarich lahavi kaira acheres. If you put them together, and when they together, then the brick, they reach the size of a tefach, so then that's good. Then it's fine. In other words, I can use both of them. I don't need each one individually. They can combine together to hold the brick. You don't have to actually have a brick. It's just a measurement. So then, if not, if you put them together, they still don't have the strength and the size, then you need to bring another crossbeam. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel gives you one other option. It's interesting. They didn't put a good picture here for this. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says like this: even if they're very thin, what you can do is you can put them apart from each other 3 tvachim, and you can turn the brick sideways and have one end of the brick, because now it's going on the width, on the length. It was before on the width. Now one beam is here, one beam is here, and I can let it rest on it, even though I don't have a tefach in the center. I don't even have 2 tefachim in the center. I have just air in the center. But because it can hold itself by on the long way, it won't fall over. So then that's also acceptable. That's Reb Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion. That's based on the explanation in Sukkah. The Gemara Sukkah has this. Let's say one was high up, one was below. You see this picture, 181. You can tell one is raised up, one is raised up, and one is lower. Now we need them to be together to create a tefach. It needs to be the width of a tefach. The problem is half a tefach is up here and half a tefach is down there. So what's the halacha? You can imagine, you view it as if the bottom one is raised up and the upper one is lower down, so they're together. It's not a problem. There's one condition. The upper one can't be in a place where it's invalid, and the lower one can't be in a place that it's invalid. It can't be above 20 amas, and it can't be below 10 tefachim. Amar Abaya says, Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda savar lakavua b'chada polagla b'chada. Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda is the son of Rabbi Yehuda bar Bilai. The first Mishnah that we had in Eiruvin was that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a mavid could be above 20 amas. Rabbi Yehuda also held in our Mishnah that if it's weak, you can view it as if it's made out of metal, as long as it's the right size. So Abaya says Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda holds the viewing part, but he doesn't hold the 20 amas part. He holds that you can imagine that it's lower down, but it still can't be above 20 amas. In that aspect, he disagrees with his father. Okay. He holds that you turn it into metal, make it strong enough. Rabbi Yehuda holds that it can only be within 20 amas. Let's take a look at the next pictures, and then we'll do the Gemara inside. But here you see how it's protruding outward. That's the akuma, or it's akuma above. It's bent over. It's like an arch. It's bent over 20 amas. That's what we're going to discuss now. And then afterwards we'll discuss the circumference. Let's go a drop further before we stop. Rabbi Yehuda says if it's wide, even though it's not strong. Masni la Rabbi Yehuda l'chia barav, kamei de Rav. Rabbi Yehuda taught Chia barav. We've had this before. That Rabbi Yehuda is a tutor for Rav's son. He's a student of Rav, but he's learning with Chia barav. He says rechav achal pishen abriya. If it's wide, even if it's not strong enough. Amalei asnaya, teach it to him rechav ubriya, that it needs to be both. It needs to be wide. It needs to be wide and strong. How could that be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? It must be machlekes. One second. We have a statement in the name of Rav where it doesn't need to be strong, where it says if it's 4 tefachim, even if it's not strong. My answer is, yeah, Rechav Arba Shaini, that's when it's wide, then it doesn't need to be strong. If it's wide 4 tefachim, it's different. It's a shalkash, but it's made out of straw. Rabbi says you assume that it's metal. My kamash malan, damrin and Ryan hainoach. What's he adding? He already said that it doesn't need to be strong. I could have thought like this. I could have thought that if I have a piece of wood that isn't strong enough, so I consider it as if it's strong enough, fine. But if I have straw that's never strong enough, then what do I assume? It's a different material? That's too much. By wood, I assume that it's a stronger piece of wood. And it's not assume, I view it as if it's stronger. But if it's made out of straw, what I view it that it's wood or that it's metal, that's a chiddush that you do. You assume that it's made out of the stronger material. Akuma, if it's crooked, then you view it as if it's straight. Pshita, that's obvious. It's Ryan, you view it. Kamashman Reb Zera, no, we have a chiddush of Reb Zera. Let's say that it's crooked in a way that it's protruding outside the mavi. So Ryan, I'm sorry. It's within 20 and it's protruding over 20, like we saw in the picture. Let's say it goes down into 10 tefachim low. What you do is you remove the part that's protruding. Then you see what the gap is in between the two edges. And if the gap is not more than 3 tefachim, then it's good. And if not, then you have to bring another one. The Gemara says, that's also obvious. Lavud, what's the problem? It says, no, we have a problem here. It's a real problem. That if it's protruding outside the mavi, we should suspect maybe he's going to follow outside the mavi. He's going to say, look, see the pole goes over there. I can even walk till the end of the pole. And the truth is, he's just left the walls of the Mavi. That's a problem. Mashmalan, the Chiddush is that we don't say that. We say that it starts in the Mavi and the other side is the Mavi. That's good enough. Okay. I got the Vach, everyone. Good week.